Think about how many search bars you use at work. Slack has one, Google Drive has another, your email, your project management tool, your file storage. My guest today reckons knowledge workers juggle as many as 20 search tools daily, and now he's built the fix. Welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. I'm your host, John Krohn. Today, my great guest is Josh Clemm, Vice President of Engineering at Dropbox, where he's focused on building Dash, an AI-powered search across every application you use for work. Based on his extensive experience, including 8 years leading 400 engineers at Uber, this is an enlightening episode across AI, building effective products, and cultivating productive teams. Enjoy. This episode of Super Data Science is made possible by Dell, Intel, Area, and MongoDB. Josh, welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. It's a delight to have you on. Where are you joining us from today?
I am at the Dropbox offices in San Francisco. And right now I'm the Vice President of Engineering for Dropbox.
Nice. Yeah, it's like you're reading what I was just going to say. You're the VP of Engineering at Dropbox, leading the development specifically of something called Dropbox Dash, which is something that I'm excited to talk to you about in probably quite a lot of detail. So my understanding is that it's an AI-powered universal search and knowledge management tool. So I think people are probably predominantly aware of Dropbox. I am certainly predominantly aware of Dropbox as being a storage solution. And so this sounds like something that would enable me to leverage AI to make use of all of the information that I have stored in Dropbox.
Yes and no. So if you think about the history of Dropbox way back in the day, the story was really you have all these files and they're all in different computers, and maybe you're using a thumb drive and how do I get these things synced from one computer to the other? And that was really the origin story for Dropbox. And obviously it's been extremely successful about file storage, about syncing, and of course sharing. If you were to ask, what is the 2025 version of Dropbox? What would that look like? Well, files are all in the cloud. And unfortunately, there's kind of like scattered across all of your different work apps. You might open up your browser right now. I've got probably about 50 open tabs. Throughout my day, I'm going over to Slack. I'm going over to our internal doc, Paper. You might have things in Google Docs, Google Slides, over in Jira. And it's really trying to figure out how to kind of sync all that in one place. So that is really Dropbox Dash. It is a bit of a departure from just sort of pure file storage. We want to make sense of and organize your cloud content so that you can then search across all of that. And once you've done search, you of course can do chat, you can get answers. And then the more interesting stuff, a lot of the agentic stuff comes after that.
Nice. And so basically, if I'm understanding correctly, the no in your response to me saying, is it kind of AI search over my files? It's because it's much broader than that.
That's right. Yeah, you can absolutely have Dropbox content with thousands of files. You could have images. We have a lot of customers who are creatives, so they're making documentaries. They're sports teams, and they've created all this footage. Maybe they're doing music. So yeah, that's absolutely one of the pieces that we'll ingest and bring in. But it could be all your other work content, because that's really where people are working in today's world.
All right. So this is, I guess, a general enterprise search tool. And in a recent article, you said that enterprise search is broken, end quote. And you positioned Dropbox Dash as a tool that unlocks the critical first step in many intelligent workflows, which is universal search. Can you elaborate for us on why enterprise search is broken and how you've devised a solution with Dash?
If you're trying to find something at work right now, you're going to have to go to all these individual apps, and they have their own search bar. You're going to have 12, 20 different search bars to potentially consider. And that is just kind of ridiculous. Each one of these apps, of course, have made our lives better for that particular area. But when you start to add it up, it's very, very broken. You might have those files in all these different places. And so universal search is a huge unlock to overall productivity in the workplace. That's kind of what we're trying to do. That's why we're saying the traditional enterprise search is broken. You do need this more universal search. And that's the context layer that we are trying to build for businesses.
You've described this solution as an AI teammate. And before we started recording, we were discussing a little bit. I didn't want to get into too much detail because I didn't want you to spoil it for me on air. But you were talking to me about multiplayer AI, which is a term that I've never heard before, and I spent a lot of time talking about AI. So is that related to this AI teammate idea? What is multiplayer AI?
So think about a lot of the AI tools you're using today. Maybe they're like different chatbots that you're trying to bring in and use your work content. They're kind of single player, I would say, right now. I might add a chat, and they spit back an answer. Great. Okay. That's great for me, but how is it better for my team, or how is it making me be more effective at work? And I do think that's sort of what might be changing in the future. The most effective AI, in our opinion, isn't just that personal assistant, it is that teammate. It's somebody that knows you, it knows your work, it knows your team. You really have to understand where you're sitting in the org. You sort of have to understand what projects that you're working on. And a lot of that ends up being on the data layer. When we bring in this various content from third parties, we're doing a lot of work to normalize it into, let's say, Markdown. Then we do some amount of more advanced content understanding. Imagine these are PDFs. You're going to have both text and images, figures, etc. We want to be able to extract that. You might see a bunch of images if you're, again, more on the creative side. We need to understand what is in that image. How does it maybe connect with everything else, all the other docs? Of course, you have things like Slack and Teams, more short form messages coming in. And you really have to almost build a graph. You want to sort of understand, how are these things all connected? How are, the projects might have some meeting transcripts, might have some documents, and it's all connected to your teammates. It's all connected to people. So I think the first aspect of multiplayer AI really needs to understand you and your team, first and foremost, and all that kind of connected data. Then I think there's some really interesting, potentially more future-looking product use cases where can you actually be doing something a little bit more collaboratively. We have a product called Stacks, for example. And the idea here is you have content in all these disparate forms. And sometimes these are just URLs. Sometimes these are just tabs in your browser. And you want to kind of bring that together. Let's say you're working on a deck for the upcoming board meeting. Well, you're going to bring in URLs. There might be slide content. There might be PDFs. You want to kind of put that in one place. And then you want to go ahead and invite your team so that they kind of can collaboratively see that, share updates, comment on things, and ask chat for any sort of useful information from that. So that's kind of my take on multiplayer AI. I think it's both on that data layer and really understanding you and your team. And then on the application layer, I do think there's some interesting innovations that might come from companies like Dropbox, but others I think are starting to explore. How do you get multiple people to interact with these chat agents?
I like this idea, and it isn't something that we've talked about in much detail on the show. In fact, it seems like such an important aspect that it blows my mind that we haven't. When you talked about multiplayer AI, I kind of assumed that you were probably thinking about multiple agents working on a team together, but this isn't that at all. I mean, so your multiplayer AI solution, it could be a single AI in a chat, or it could be an agent, or it could be a whole team of agents. It doesn't really matter. The whole point with your multiplayer AI is that the AI system understands more than one person. It's interacting with more than one person. It can help your entire team to be more productive or be more creative or something like that.
That's right. That's right.
Cool. I like that. We're gonna hopefully we get to come back to that a bunch more in this episode, because it seems like it's a paradigm shift for my thinking. And yeah, maybe we have a whole bunch of listeners out there who have already made that leap, but that is definitely a big leap in my mind. And yeah, I feel like it's going to kind of change and color the way that I see a lot of features, a lot of technologies that I think about in the AI space.
That's right. Yeah, we got to get people out of their silos. One data set just for me. to multiple data sets and potentially share it across your team.
Cool. All right. So I don't know if this is going to relate to multiplayer AI at all, but my next question for you is about Dropbox Video, uh, in which you share your favorite Dropbox feature, which is browser extensions. And I don't really, I can't think of myself having used Dropbox browser extensions. So tell us about that feature and why you think browser embedded AI will reshape daily knowledge work over the next decade.
Yeah, so this is a part of the Dropbox Dash product. We really want to make sure we work where people are. Yes, we have a website. Yes, we have a desktop app. Yes, we're in places like Slack with Slack bots. We have a mobile app. But a lot of people are working in the browser, especially for managers like me. I mean, this is our IDE, is the web browser. All of our apps are there. That's where a lot of communication is happening. That's where a lot of work is happening. And you're going off and you're exploring the web. You're doing a lot of research. And I love that I've got this sort of a side panel where Dash is there. It's able to take the context of the page that I'm currently looking at, and it's able to combine it with a lot of the existing data sources I've already connected with it. And it ends up being just very, very powerful overall. And it can enhance your workday quite a bit. I do think like over time, the browser could be a really interesting area of opportunity. I think you're starting to see this in industry around potentially browser automations. You've got a couple other companies out there building these AI browsers, Perplexity, OpenAI. There's some significant security challenges right there. Anytime you provide tool use and agents to be able to do anything on behalf of your user, you'd be very, very careful that they're not subject to prompt injection and trying to exfiltrate some of your data. And so that, I think there's still a little bit of concern, or at least thought, around how those companies might be doing it, or how you want to bring AI to the browser. At the end of the day, we still feel the approach what we're trying to do, where we ingest the content ahead of time. Building really interesting sort of graph representations of your data allows you to kind of get the best of both worlds. You're able to get those sort of combined data sets without necessarily needing to do that crawling. But I do think that's an interesting area that a lot of companies are going to be looking at going forward.
I see. So it sounds like the browser extension is critical to Dash being effective across more than just your Dropbox environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, you're working day in, day out in your browser. You've got all those tabs. And it's important that that's some of your work. That's actually a lot of your working set in a way. And so one thing that we'll do with Dash, because we have that browser extension, we'll go ahead and bring in some of your browser history so that when you kind of come back to Dash and open up Dash, it's got your working set right there. It's saying, hey, here's sort of where you left off. Here's the work that you're doing. Here's some of the tabs you've been on. Very, very helpful to kind of have that jumping off point.
Data scientists, it's time to talk about your tech. With Windows 10 support coming to an end, now is the perfect moment to rethink your setup. Enter Dell AI PCs powered by Intel Core Ultra processors. These devices are built for the demands of modern data science, delivering faster performance, smoother multitasking, and the power to handle even the most complex workflows. Whether you're training machine learning models or analyzing massive datasets, these PCs are designed to keep you ahead of the curve. Don't let outdated tech slow you down. Visit Dell.com/shoppcs to explore how you can upgrade your device and elevate your work. That's Dell.com/SHOPPCS. Nice. Really cool. Picking up on another piece that we found of something that you said online. In a LinkedIn post, you commented on a HBR, a Harvard Business Review report on how AI-generated work slop is destroying productivity. And this is something that we have talked about on the show a fair bit, but I'd love to hear your take on it. What are your 2 cents on how this problem hit home for you, and what are your tips to address work slop?
Yeah. First of all, I love that term. I don't know who coined it, but it absolutely is spot on. Work slop is the very plausible and somewhat impressive looking content that you might see at work that you maybe create yourself or somebody sends you. And then you start to look more at the substance. And wait a second, this feels pretty generic at best, or at worst, frankly, there's just like hallucinations in there. And there's a bit of a paradox, because I think the more you work in AI, like I am and a lot of your listeners are, the more you can start to spot the patterns. Everybody kind of jokes about the M dash, but there's other sort of, markers that, hey, this is AI generated. So I think the big question is, well, why is this happening? Why is so much work slop getting created out there? And you see like different reports. A lot of CEOs, almost 3/4 of CEOs, feel there's a lot of competitive pressure just to adopt AI. You hear that, oh, we need AI. I don't know what it is, but we need it here. And so you get these really early deployments or quick deployments, employees start using it, and it isn't really doing what you're expecting. And we're hearing that from some of our customers. Hey, we need AI. And the first question I ask is, well, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish? What are those use cases? What are the goals that you're trying to do? And if you don't really get crisp on that, you're going to unfortunately get work slop. The way I kind of like think about it, I don't know about you, but back in, let's say, college, let's say you're writing an essay, you're going to write, maybe you're working all night, maybe the last minute, you're kind of putting together all this stuff for your essay. And then
that's definitely me.
Yeah, exactly. The next day, you don't just turn in that first draft. You don't sort of do a first draft. You're like, all right, I'm done. Did my work, send it off. It's going to be an A. No, absolutely not. You read it over, you update, you make things stronger. Maybe you go to the thesaurus and you start switching in some words. You add in a lot of extra research. That's really how we should be treating a lot of these AI tools. They can be phenomenal partners. They can be phenomenal at generating a lot of that first draft, if you will. But it still requires that human touch. It still requires really ensuring that it reads correctly, it's high quality, the signal to noise ratio is very high, and it has very much verifiable facts. Very, very kind of important to get right. So how do you kind of fix that, other than more of this like guidance, high level guidance? Kind of goes back to the stuff we were talking about before. Your work context just matters a ton here. A lot of companies will maybe superficially go off and add third-party connectors. There's a very popular approach is to use MCP tools in agents, and they are that's a phenomenal protocol to kind of get up and running and build some really impressive agents right off the bat. But they are very slow. They can't really get access to all the types of content you may want. And they use a ton of tokens in a lot of cases. So while that's a good solution, you still really need to kind of think about where you want to get your work context overall. On our side with Dash, like I mentioned before, we do bring everything in, we ingest it, we do understanding, and we then index it. Right now we use both. We're building both a lexical and a vector index. On the lexical side, we use BM25. It is still the workhorse. This thing has been around for a few decades, and it is very, very good at more like keyword type searches. And this is important. If your customers need part numbers, you need to do more of a keyword search. If your customers are creatives and they're looking for vintage cars, okay, great. Semantic works there. A lot of customers will want both. And so you really want to have that kind of hybrid retrieval. And so that's something we're doing here to just ensure the context that we're providing these LLMs, these agents, are of the highest quality. Other things to look at are the evals. I mentioned before, when we talk to customers, you want to understand, what are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? What metric may they want to move? A lot of that you can actually bundle and create a bunch of successful test sets. Like, okay, this is what good looks like. This is effectively my benchmark, my internal benchmark. And then once you have that, you can compare it with some of these AI deployments, and it'll be much more clear. Is this working, or am I just going to get more work slop? And the last kind of tip I'd say here, there's still a lot of pressure out there to adopt AI. A lot of CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, got to use AI, got to use AI. And so there's the pressure's there. But about 55% of employees, they don't even know how to use AI. So I do think you should look at training. It's essential to kind of do share outs, let people do demos of what they're doing. And your most likely candidates to do that training are probably your highest performers. So even if you just went there, they're likely already using and adopting these AI products. They're likely doing it in a way where it's much higher quality. Let them help train up the rest of the force.
Yeah, this training and sharing is critical. I think collaborating together and understanding how AI can be used to actually be improving productivity is critical because it's very easy to be inserting AI into lots of places in your organization,
Mm-hmm.
but it could end up being the case that the places that you're putting AI in are parts of work that are actually not very useful in the organization at all. Like there's all kinds of people's workdays in organizations that aren't moving the needle on anything. And if you're getting AI deployed in those workflows, you're not going to see an ROI from that AI solution because the work that's being automated
Yeah.
isn't moving a needle anywhere anyway. Um, yeah, I guess that's kind of a tangential point to what you were just
No,
saying. But yeah,
it's very fair because if you were to look at what is the most successful AI tool yet to date, it's really on the coding agents, and they're amazingly powerful. I absolutely love coding. It's so much fun because I got into coding not because I like to code. It's because I like to build. I love creating. I love that side of it. And so if these coding assistants can help me code faster, absolutely, because I can continue to build. But then you sort of step back and you say, well, what does the software development lifecycle look like at these companies? You have a lot of things upstream of when you're actually ready to code. You've got all the work you're trying to do, talking to customers, gathering requirements, trying to figure out exactly what you want, what the design might look like. That part is still, in some ways, very similar to how we've been operating before. Finally, you might hand it off on the coding side, and you can absolutely accelerate that side of that phase of the journey. So I think it's like also really looking at that entire workflow too. You might have optimized one part, but you're going to create maybe bottlenecks in other parts.
for sure, especially if you're generating a lot of slop, you're going to be
There's a lot of
creating some
cleanup work at that
bottlenecks.
point. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just confusing people, having people wasting time reading. Yeah, slop. Super irritating thing to have to come across, especially when you only realize it partway through. You're like, they got me. They better admit to it. All right. So you talked a bit there in your response about context engineering, and
Yeah.
we have a number of questions related to that. So you've thought about AI systems from the inside out, shaped by years working on context-rich, high-reliability architectures, from sensor data fusion in your early career to advanced machine learning, ranking, conversational AI at Dropbox, as well as previously at Uber. In a recent LinkedIn post regarding how your team uses context engineering, you wrote that context is the real constraint when building agentic AI systems, and that bigger, as in more context, isn't better. Too many data can lead to what you called context rot. So tell us about, maybe we should get a quick intro to context engineering for listeners who aren't aware of it anyway, but then move on to why this is such a critical part of having agentic systems work correctly.
Sort of stepping back and really kind of considering how AI works and how these large language models work. You're, of course, prompting it. That was really the beginning. We called everything prompt engineering. You're fat fingering in both your query, but you might be providing a lot of extra information that these LLMs might need. And that's very powerful overall. What we're trying to now put in the context window for these LLMs is just continuing to grow. If you want to be able to support more complex queries where you're doing tool calling, maybe you're retrieving from remote servers, maybe you're making a write action later, that all kind of starts to fill in the context window. And at some point, you get really bad quality degradation the longer it gets. You might see these new frontier these models get released, and it's like, okay, we have a 1 million context window. Gemini was really the first one, but all the new ones. Okay, now we're at 2 million. We've got 2 million tokens we can handle in our context window. The problem is if you were to use all of that, you would see significant degradation in quality. They end up filling up very quickly, almost more like 100K or 200K. And there's some really interesting benchmarks out there. One I've always referenced is this benchmark called Nolima. And it's very much like this more complicated sort of needle in the haystack type situation where you give it a very, very big doc, and then you're trying to find some information and trying to extract it. And the longer the doc, the worse. You see that curve kind of drop down. More likely, because a lot of us aren't necessarily loading, the Harry Potter series into an LLM and then asking questions. More likely, we are asking an LLM a question, and then we have a follow-up question, and then we have another follow-up question. And there's more papers on that sort of multi-turn conversation where these LLMs they get lost, and the accuracy degrades quite a bit. On our side with Dash, we were seeing the same thing. Anytime we were adding all these tools, and it would go off and retrieve some information, the data would come back. Our accuracy just dropped off considerably. We ended up blogging about this. We talked about sort of our approach and how we're solving it. And it's very much, instead of using multiple tools, we're going with just one tool. We're going with sort of a super tool in a way to access that index I talked about earlier that has all the content. You're seeing other companies do the same thing. Cloudflare, Anthropic, they've been blogging recently about the same topic. And their solutions is often to have the LLM write code to invoke those tools, or pick a tool among a selection of tools. There's a few different solutions here that you can do, but it's all about trying to tighten up that context window. It's like this sweet spot where if you give it too much, you're gonna have bad results. And if you don't give it enough, the LLM is gonna have to just fall back to whatever data it was trained on, which frankly, in the workplace, it's not gonna know anything about your work. So you have to kind of pack it with the exact data that you need and nothing else.
How can our listeners, if they want to be great context engineers, and you've called online context engineering the high status job in AI right now. So we might have lots of listeners thinking, ooh, I might like to, up my pay or my value to my organization by being a great context engineer. What is the secret to being a successful context engineer?
Well, I kind of think back to more in the early software days, some of even my experience. And anytime I was writing software, there was always limits. You might have memory limits, CPU limits. If I'm working in embedded computing, you only have so many bytes to work with. Some of the past projects I was working on writing software for UAVs, like low-end computers, or working in very lossy networking environments. And so you're always thinking very deeply about what data am I shipping with my product to run on these low-end computers, or what data, how do I reduce the amount of data where I might have to send over the network. So folks who kind of understand that almost like constraints breed creativity, you have to be very creative when you have these constraints, they're going to do very well. Just think about like a payload you're sending with the Mars rover. You got to send that thing off. It's going across space for 5-6 months. It shows up. Does it have everything it needs? You sure hope so. So people who kind of understand that piece and are very good at planning are going to be quite good overall in this area. A few other disciplines that make sense. A lot of people who have worked with search. So search is in effect this is what Google's been trying to do for decades now, is just taking the world's information and serving it up in these little snippets, these 10 blue links. So if you've got that background or have an interest in getting that background, you're obviously going to be able to then pull out the most relevant information from a very wide corpus. Search has sort of been, it used to be the hero, and it's still the hero. It's just more of an unsung hero in the world of AI. Part of that is retrieval. Part of that is like the recommender systems, almost like more classic machine learning. And the last, I think, area that matters for really good context engineering is understanding the outputs, evals, understanding whatever goes in. I need to then be able to verify what comes out. And somebody who's very good at tests, defining things up front, connecting it with the inputs, you're going to thrive in this field.
Are you feeling the AI anxiety? From questions of job security to cybersecurity and everything in between, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the rate of AI innovation. Enter Area, the enterprise AI orchestration and security platform built to boost your confidence. With Area, you don't have to compromise between speed and innovation or between security and governance. Quickly deploy AI without cutting corners on compliance. Give your teams the confidence to adopt AI with Area. Ready to eliminate your AI anxiety? Visit Area.com to get started for free today. That's AIRIA.com, AIRIA.com. Excellent. Thank you for those tips. And I love how you were describing search as the unsung hero of success in AI. And so on that note, let's talk about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So you've argued online that RAG isn't dead, which implies that a lot of people think it is. And so tell us about how it's evolved into richer forms of context engineering.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason a lot of people will say RAG is dead is really how RAG originated. This is the retrieval augmented generation. There was a paper many years ago, and the technique that they described was using almost like generating different vector embeddings from your data and storing it in a vector database. And then, of course, retrieving that later, passing it along with the prompt, and you're off and running. And the reason vectors were chosen, it ties really nicely with the underlying architecture for large language models. Everything is very kind of token and embedding based. And a lot of people really went way in and decided to create vector databases for and store all their content in vector databases. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, you still have to retrieve something to be able to add and additional information to these LLMs. How it's evolved, I would say a couple things. One, vector retrieval is great at kind of like meaning based. I mentioned before, creatives might want to search for old car, and vintage cars will show up. But a lot of people are recognizing that these more keyword search approaches using techniques like BM25 can be very, very effective. And so hybrid retrieval has become much more important overall to getting your content for these LLMs. But the other kind of pattern that's emerged is more around agentic retrieval. And the idea here is, think about the world of, you have the data layer, you have all this data, and then you have almost like the application that'll go reach and go fetch that data. In the old world, you often just had one chance. I'm going to make one retrieval call. Whatever I get back, I'm going to use. And that was really kind of the initial architecture for RAG. Again, hybrid retrieval, better. But if you want to handle very complex queries, where based on the data you get back, you may take a very different path, that's where you want these agents to not just fetch once, but have multiple tries to go fetch content. And that might be from a database. That might be from a third party, an API, MCP call. That might be actually taking an action, and then based on that, it may decide to do a retrieval. So you have a bit of the data layer and then the sort of almost agentic layer. And I think it's okay to kind of think about both, because you do want those multiple tries, but you also want to organize your data and index your data in a way where it can be explored. And you're seeing this quite often, again, kind of going back to coding agents. Claude Code, Cursor, these are extremely popular tools. They need access to your code base. And the code base isn't as simple just going and looking up some chunk of code. You need to almost explore the code base. You need to understand folder structures. You need to understand, obviously, parts of the code itself. You need to find exact function names. So you would need more of a keyword search. And so you kind of like have this hybrid architecture emerging where, yes, there's some amount of indexing your code base, but these coding agents have an opportunity to almost explore that index and then pull back all of these different bits of context to get you the best outcome.
Nice. I love that explanation. Thank you for the deep dive into the evolution of RAG in search. And now tying what you were talking about right at the end there, you brought back your love of, if I dare call it, vibe coding, of building easily with tools like Claude Code.
Yeah.
And let's now tie that into the search conversation that we've been having recently, because you wrote an AI search app with 100 lines of code and open sourced it. What did you learn from that experience? And why did you do that?
So I'll go back a little bit of history. I'll give you a little bit more of a side app I work on. I'm a big fan of sports. I like football and I like fantasy football. And I like fantasy football for the reasons you'd expect. I love the stats part of it. And I love to write my own almost programs or apps to help me do a better job in my fantasy football leagues. And one of the features I always wanted to build was more of almost a season preview for a particular player. You see these in a lot of publications. Here's what to expect this year with this particular player. And I was thinking, like, how do I do that? I could do sort of Mad Lib style, but I started to explore a lot of language models. And my time at Uber Eats, we were starting to do some work with conversational AI, so I was familiar with the technology. And this was back maybe 2021, 2022. And I was looking at a lot of more open AI models, GPT-3. Like, okay, there's something here that is very, very impressive. I can create the content. Of course, I had to go fetch fresh stats for the upcoming season. That's where you want retrieval augmented generation. And I was trying to kind of put that together. And it wasn't super easy. I ended up getting a version of it working, but I learned a lot about prompting. And I then stumbled upon a product called Perplexity, which I was a big fan of. And they really did a phenomenal job, kind of almost pioneering this really intuitive product interface where they're collecting all the search content and able to present it in a really easy way, effectively answers. And so when I saw that, I was like, you know what? I want to kind of go back to some of the work I was doing. I want to maybe bring in some of the newer models, think about different techniques that I had sort of observed from that product, and ended up building my own search app, very similar to that, kind of connecting those two things, the fantasy football season outlooks, with trying to get my own like sort of search app going. And because I learned a lot, I figured, let me put that out there and open source some of it so that others who may come along the way will learn, different ways of prompting, different ways of adding grounded facts through citations. Really trying to kind of push the state of the art with retrieval augmented generation, and then a little bit of a preview of what you could do further. So I was sort of like really starting to just understand how these models worked, how I could get the most out of them. And frankly, it's a lot of fun. And a lot of those techniques are still going strong, which is pretty cool to see.
Nice. And then it must make it helpful for things like Dash at Dropbox, having that real experience of making something work. It must be easier to then talk to engineers on your team and help them brainstorm on how to be getting through some of the things that they're struggling with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we want to be that answers engine for the workplace. And it's essential. You got to get these things right. You've got to be able to reduce the hallucinations. You have to be able to present real user facts. And the better way, better output where you can have citations so you can almost prove your work, that is going to be important for any product, especially with these AI products.
Nice. Makes a lot of sense. You've actually had more than just your fantasy football side project get onto our radar here at the Super Data Science Podcast. You also, it looks like you might have the #1 earthquake app on Android called Earthquake Alert. And something called Yaddle.ai, which is an LLM-powered search engine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, tell us a bit about those projects as well, and how doing these side projects helps keep you sharp and grounded. Yeah, why you think they're an effective part of your leadership style.
Yeah. Well, so YADL is that 100 lines sort of
I gotcha.
answers, and
I gotcha. I
that's the
gotcha.
fancier version. I continue to work on it on the side, and it's just, again, it's a very fun, almost playground for me to do some of the real time search and try these different models that come out. I have a model switcher. I use some amount of query classification to figure out in certain cases which model to route to. It's a fun project for sure. Same thing with the earthquake app. This was this goes back way back when I was getting my master's, and I was taking a entrepreneurship class, and we started to learn about these emerging platforms with mobile, with the iPhone and with Android. And so I was like, hey, let me just sort of play around with this to see what I can build. Turns out when you're an early independent developer and you put an app out there, you end up getting a nice flywheel effect. And so, yeah, over the years, anyone that's been looking for earthquake information would spot my app. And I like earthquakes. I grew up in the Bay Area. I've had to experience a lot of earthquakes in my life, and just had sort of a fascination with that. It was really a learning opportunity overall. Kind of connecting to your second question, I do feel very strongly that leaders, engineering leaders, they really need to find the sweet spot with how technical they are. You obviously can't be too hands-on, because then you have no time to think about strategy, people development, org design, things like that. But you also can't be not technical and come across like, oh, you're up in the ivory tower. You're just saying, hey, we got to go do this, and not have that backing to say, here's why, or here's why I agree. So I do think leaders finding that kind of technical balance is really important. That's an important part of my own philosophy, who I look for in good leaders at work. And a lot of times you may not have a lot of time during the day, so you can do things on the side. I also feel very strongly AI is changing things considerably. These tools are very, very new. And it's very hard to say, hey, go use more AI. We talked about that earlier with work slop. That's sort of why we're in the work slop situation. You almost need to use them yourselves. You need to embrace them. You need to understand how they work, and frankly, their limitations. And then you're just so much more willing and able to provide crisp and concrete advice on, yes, this is an AI tool we want to deploy. Here's why. Here, I've thought about it. Here's some gotchas. Here's how we're going to address that. And so I do think AI changes things, and which is why just staying much more technical, much more sort of on top of the trends is essential in today's modern leadership.
Ready to shape the future of AI collaboration? MongoDB is hosting an in-person hackathon in San Francisco on January 10th, focused on building tools and techniques that let AI agents work together toward complex goals. Teams of up to 4 will compete for over $30,000 in cash prizes, and finalists get invited to showcase live at mongodb.local San Francisco on January 15th. You'll pitch to top names in the industry, an opportunity you won't want to miss. Use the code MDBBuilder to get 50% off tickets. Space is limited, so apply now. In the show notes, we've got a link to the MongoDB agentic orchestration and collaboration hackathon page with more details, including how to apply. Nice. Speaking of your leadership, something that I haven't mentioned yet on air is your tremendous background. So you've managed and scaled large teams from, based on our research, over 150 engineers at LinkedIn, over 400 at Uber. And you did that driven by a belief in a people-first approach, which I hear coming through in your answers already. So tell us, what's the most challenging part of maintaining this people-first approach once a team surpasses, I don't know if you know Dunbar's number.
Yep.
Yeah. So Robin Dunbar, he's an Oxford University researcher, and He studied lots of different communities all over the world. And basically, there's this number of, it varies somewhat, but it's around 150. It's kind of the maximum number of direct relationships that you can have in a community. And that LinkedIn number is right there at Dunbar's number. And then the Uber number of 400 people, that's well over 150. So how do you, maintain that people first approach once you can't know everybody's name?
Yeah, and at LinkedIn, that was more of a total number, but absolutely, it's very important to think about when you're growing teams. There's sort of growing teams, and then there's scaling teams, and the things that you were doing, or the almost the spirit behind the different processes or cultural pieces, norms that you've defined. You want to figure out how to kind of replicate that in a way where you're just not taking on more work yourself, because that just won't work. Maybe in the old day, you're doing that kind of sit down team meeting where you're doing open discussions. As the team grows, maybe those turn into small group AMA sessions, and you can do multiple of those. As it grows, now you're trying to meet with maybe smaller groups or your skips, and at the same time being very deliberate with the leaders that you have to try to kind of replicate that all the way down throughout the organization. Maybe it's a version of a regular all hands. That's something we actually love doing. I started doing this back at Uber during the pandemic, where everybody's now working remotely. You're kind of losing the sense of self, sense of team identity. And I got a really great suggestion from a manager of my team where, he's like, hey, why don't we start sort of a very short and sweet weekly check-in where they can kind of hear from you on priorities. We can maybe share wins together. We can kind of talk about any shifts that we may want to do. And I said, yeah, let's give it a shot. We ended up doing that for almost 3 years. And I still continue to do that today at Dropbox. And it's just like a fun ritual to bring everybody together. That's only one way of doing it. You sort of have to think through all these different aspects of how to kind of scale culture. And the other thing I like to really kind of emphasize is I like to really obsess about the inputs of teams or team productivity. I think a lot of times we're looking at the outputs. We're seeing, well, how many PRs are they putting up? How many features have we shipped? And a lot of times the solutions are on those inputs. It's, do we have clear goals? Is our strategy sound? Do I have the org structured correctly to match that? Do I have all the right leaders in place? How do I think about team structure? Do I have good seniority mix so that we have mentors along the way? How's our operational rigor? If you have outages all the time or a lot of bugs all the time, teams are constantly context switching back, not being able to really move forward. You think about tooling, you think about a lot of those different aspects. I think that's one way to make sure that you can still drive in a very people-first way, but also make sure it's scaling overall.
Yeah, related to what you were just saying, an interesting piece that we pulled out is that you often describe your role not as building a product, but creating conditions for great engineering to happen. There's a tweet where you shared a meme about thinking like a farmer. So the farmer doesn't yell at the plants because they aren't growing. Instead, the farmer focuses on preparing the soil, irrigating, fertilizing. And I love that our researcher, Serge Massis, he's a data scientist at Syngenta, the agricultural company. And so he went into a lot of detail on his question on this farming one. And so using some inspiration from Serge here, what's one quote unquote soil problem that we have in tech companies today? What are we getting wrong about the soil for engineering culture? And how can we improve it? How can we farm better products?
Yeah, so I don't know when I came across that picture, but I'm sure many of you have maybe seen it. It's just sort of a screenshot from some sort of conference, Think Like a Farmer. And it really kind of touches on the aspects I was just mentioning. You're obsessing about the inputs. You're really making sure, okay, am I planting correctly? Am I thinking about seasons? Am I building resilience in my organization? And I do think that's probably one of the bigger challenges here. The world of AI, we're moving very quickly. There's all these new innovations. new frontier models coming out. They're constantly leapfrogging one another. And there's just always these questions around, do we bring this in? Do we adopt it? Do we not? What's our competitors doing? And I think that kind of whiplash does affect a lot of teams very negatively. They end up losing a lot of morale. They maybe are working long hours, but not moving in the right direction or making meaningful progress. And so I think just kind of building that kind of more of a regular culture of resilience is really important. Being very upfront with your team, saying, look, like things are going to be tricky, or yeah, there's going to be these different competitors coming in. Almost emphasizing, here's what we think about it, here's our strengths, here's how we're okay. Just like that kind of constant communication to recognize the current environment we're in, because it is messy and it just feels overwhelming at times. But create that right culture, and I think the teams that understand that, embrace that, they're going to continue to thrive. They're going to kind of get through the noise. They're going to be much more focused on their goal, and teams like that are going to win.
Great. I've got one last kind of technical leadership question for you before we start wrapping up the episode. This is another tweet of yours where you called out an anti-pattern where big organizations become so risk averse that they outsource every decision to an A/B test. How should leaders distinguish between decisions that need data and decisions that just need your gut instinct to get right?
It's quite problematic, especially with bigger companies, because there's some amount of risk aversion. You may be operating in a position of strength. You might be a market leader, and you almost don't want to lose that. And you kind of open yourselves up for other startups or other competitors to disrupt you. And it kind of just creeps in. It's a bit of a problem overall. And it's sort of a problem where the more scale you have, the more data you have. And so it's very clear, oh, I just have to look at the data. It'll tell me what I can do. And, I see some analogies with AI tools. I do think you're seeing a world where people who are starting to embrace AI for almost like all their decision making, they're losing a little bit of their own sense of here's what I think might work, or some conviction. And so I think those analogies are very, very important. It's essential to try to stay grounded as much, to try to maybe talk to your customers more, get more of the qualitative data to offset with some of the quantitative data you might be seeing, and kind of just bringing that together and make much more well-informed decisions. I remember like a long time ago I think it was Uber Eats. We had a smaller competitor that was moving very quickly and shipping a lot of features. And we were always like, whoa, what are they doing? What are they seeing? And later we found out they didn't actually have an A/B testing framework even set up. This was very early days for them. And it was almost like you're envious of that, because it's like, wow, that requires you to be very convicted. If you're going to ship something, you're going to ship it. You're going to move quickly, and you're going to learn from it. And if it doesn't work, sure, you can pull it back. But a lot of times you bring in those extra data sources, it'll draw out decisions. It'll really kind of create some amount of lethargy in your organization. You've got to fight that as much as possible. You got to sort of stay sharp, stay convicted, stay human, and be very intentional with your decisions.
Excellent soundbite to round off your technical responses there, Josh. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, before I let my guests go, I let you know just before we started recording that I always ask my guests for a book recommendation. It sounded like you might be reading something interesting right now.
I am reading Masters of Doom. It is the story of the two Johns, John Carmack and Romero, and they are the co-founders of Doom, the video game Doom.
Oh,
and
right.
Quake.
Yeah. That was such an iconic thing for me as a kid growing up, that I remember. I grew up in downtown Toronto, so I would take the subway to school.
Mhm.
And when I was very small, sometimes my grandmother would come and take me, and she always wanted to spoil me. And so she took me to a bookstore, and I had her buy me the Doom strategy guide,
Okay.
even though we did not have a computer. And I just kind of memorized gameplay and the guns and the demons. And yeah, it was a really iconic thing for me in the early 90s.
Yeah, it's been a fun read. It gives you that kind of glimpse of the early days of video game development. And, you're back in the days when you had the only computers were at universities. They were these big mainframes. And then it started to transition to the personal computer, the different Apple, Apple II, Commodore 64. And a lot of that was like, some of that was a part of my childhood, a little bit on the later side, but it's nice to sort of get that nostalgia hit. And, it's just sort of fun to see the creators of something and their backstory. All the stuff comes from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Masters of Doom. There's something for our early 3D gaming lovers. And before I let you go, Josh, I've cited tons of great posts, LinkedIn posts you've made, tweets. Where are the best places for people to be following you after the episode?
Absolutely. Definitely check me out on LinkedIn, and I'm on X, Twitter. I like to bring in a lot of my observations in AI, but I do like to connect it to the world of maybe large scale software development that dominated my first kind of couple decades of work. Because I am spotting a lot of similarities around what agentic architectures compared to just microservices. There's a lot of overlap, and I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from one another. The ML practitioners, the backend engineers, I think there's a lot of really nice synergy there. So that's going to be a lot of the content I put out. And of course, I'm bringing up a lot about our innovations on Dash, what we're doing at Dropbox, how we're thinking about machine learning, how we're thinking about different optimizations, context engineering, the works.
Love that. Yeah. Our listeners, I'm sure, got a great taste of your brilliant ideas related to AI and engineering leadership, product development, and I'm sure that you will have a whole bunch more followers after this episode as well. Thanks so much, Josh, for joining us. And maybe we can catch up again in the future and hear how Dash and other AI initiatives at Dropbox are coming along.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's been a pleasure. Love talking about Dropbox, love talking about Dash, and love talking about some of those, stories from the past.
Plenty to learn from the rich experience of Josh Clemm. In today's episode, he covered how enterprise search is broken because workers now have 12 to 20 different search bars across their apps. Dropbox Dash aims to solve this by creating a universal search layer that ingests content from all your work tools. He talked about how multiplayer AI means AI systems that understand not just you, but your entire team, their projects, and how everything connects, enabling collaborative intelligence rather than single-player chatbot interactions. He talked about how context rot occurs when you stuff too much information into an LLM's context window. The key is context engineering in only the needed data and nothing else. And we also talked about how over-reliance on A/B testing creates organizational lethargy. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, the URLs for Josh Clemm's social media profiles, as well as my own, at superdatascience.com/951. Thanks to everyone on the Super Data Science podcast team, our podcast manager, Sonia Brajevich, media editor, Mario Pombo, partnerships manager, Natalie Jaisky, researcher, Serge Massis, writer, Dr. Zara Karche, and our founder, Kirill Aromenko. Thanks to all of them for producing another excellent episode for us today, for enabling that team to create this free Super Data Science podcast for you. We are deeply grateful to our sponsors. You can support the show by checking out our sponsors' links in the show notes. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show yourself, you can head to johnkrohn.com/podcast to learn how to do that. Otherwise, share this episode with folks who would benefit from it. Review on whatever podcasting platform you use or YouTube. I think that's helpful for driving more engagement and viewers on the show. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber, but most importantly, just keep on tuning in. I'm so grateful to have you listening and hope I can continue to make episodes you love for years and years to come. Till next time, keep on rocking it out there, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.